Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one. A brave pilot performs a repair in mid-flight during an attempt to break the record for the longest continuous flight in the early 20th century. At that time, long-duration flights were a major challenge due to technological limitations, and there was a constant need for maintenance, even while in the air. This is known as the sequence of banned photos of Adolf Hitler, taken in the 1920s. In them, he appears wearing traditional Bavarian clothes, including shorts and high socks, trying to pose in a masculine way. However, Hitler himself did not approve of the result and banned the release of the images. Despite this, someone managed to secretly preserve these photos, and they eventually reached the public, becoming a source of ridicule of the figure to this day. A curious scene: an alligator pulling a small carriage with a little girl, photographed in 1897. Practices like this were seen as unusual attractions at the time, long before the existence of stricter safety regulations. The test of the bulletproof vest in 1923 was anything but ordinary. Two men participated in a daring demonstration where one fired at point-blank range while the other trusted his life to the novelty. French soldiers play cards in the trenches during the harsh winter of 1916, in the middle of World War I. Life in the trenches was marked by intense cold, mud, and lack of resources, and games like this served as distractions from the harsh front routine. A curious cart pulled by a hippopotamus in 1924. Although horses were the traditional animals for this function, some curious and circus exhibitions of the time used exotic animals to impress the public and draw attention to shows or fairs. An entire building was relocated in Blaj, Romania in 1987 in an impressive engineering operation to make way for a new avenue. The building was supported by tracks and carefully moved without being demolished, an extraordinary feat for the time. Queen Elizabeth II during World War II in 1939, still young and serving as a mechanic and driver in the Auxiliary Territorial Service. Away from the privileges of royalty, she received military training and worked in vehicle maintenance, becoming the only woman of the British royal family to formally serve in the armed forces during the conflict. These two images of Soviet soldier Yugen Stepanovich Kobytev shockingly show the weight of war. The first was taken in 1941, the day he left for the front, while the second in 1945, after the end of World War II. Only 4 years separate the portraits, although they seem like decades. During a meeting with Soviet leaders in 1963, Fidel Castro was reportedly caught wearing a Rolex on his wrist, a detail that contrasted with his image as an austere revolutionary leader. In another photo from the same year, he appears smoking a cigar and once again displaying his luxury watch, while his people suffered from hunger in his country. An American soldier poses mounted on an elephant while handling a Colt M1895 machine gun. The unusual scene is believed to have been recorded in 1914 in Sri Lanka. In this photo from the 1970s, a 16-year-old boy appears on a trip to Sweden with his family. No one could have imagined that this boy, Osama bin Laden, decades later, would become the most feared and hunted terrorist of the United States. The King of Rock also wore a uniform. In 1958, Elvis Presley was drafted by the United States Army, trading stages for military training. His entry into the armed forces was a shock for fans, but reinforced his image as an ordinary citizen serving his country. Cast members of Freaks from the Ringling Brothers pose for a group photo in 1924. The famous circus was known for its unique attractions, which included people with unusual physical traits and conditions exhibited in shows called freak shows. These presentations were popular in the early 20th century and drew large audiences in the United States. Kazimierz Shand, in an equestrian competition with horse and rider, jumping an obstacle in front of an audience in the year 1933. The maneuvers performed at that time were considered insane and at the same time fascinating, requiring enormous courage and skill from both the rider and the animal. P.T. Barnum and General Tom Thumb posing together in a photograph around 1850. Tom Thumb, whose real name was Charles Stratton, became one of Barnum's greatest attractions and one of the first phenomena presented in circuses, achieving worldwide fame. This partnership helped consolidate Barnum as one of the greatest entertainment entrepreneurs of the 19th century. A television installed inside a car in 1965. At that time, portable televisions began to be integrated into vehicles. The innovation marked the beginning of the idea of bringing domestic conveniences and utilities into cars, starting the transformation of the travel experience. In case you think current trends are bold, remember the peculiar fashions of the 1940s and 50s, such as the famous bullet bra. This style of underwear, with its pointed and striking shape, became popular among celebrities of the time and marked a curious phase in the history of women's fashion, with beauty standards very different from today's. This was the type of exercise carried out at the Italian Cavalry School. Riders and horses were trained to face almost vertical descents, requiring courage and exceptional mastery of the horse. The impressive scene was recorded in 1906 and showed the intensity of these military trainings of the time. In 1945, Harold Agnew, with a big smile in front of his military camp, seemed carefree. In his hands, he carried nothing less than the core of the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. The photo, seemingly ordinary, hides one of the darkest moments in human history. After the German surrender in 1945, German soldiers were forced to watch images of their acts in Nazi concentration camps. The photograph captures the shock stamped on their faces. Some stare in silence, others cover their eyes, unable to endure the brutal reality. This exhibition was part of the Allied efforts to expose the scale of the crimes committed by the regime they had served. Under intense sun and heavy uniforms, fainting while on duty was a common risk for the guards of the British royalty. In the scene recorded in 1970, an Imperial Guard soldier falls during a parade while his companions remain motionless, maintaining the rigid military discipline required by protocol. This British soldier proudly shows the helmet that saved his life in 1918. Adolf Hitler was photographed at 35 years old, leaving Landsberg prison, where he was imprisoned after the failed beer hall putsch in 1923. The attempted coup consisted of seizing power by force in Bavaria, but was quickly crushed. It was during his imprisonment that Hitler began writing Mein Kampf, a work that exposed his ideas and political ambitions. In occupied France in 1944, women who had sexual relations with Nazi soldiers were seen as collaborators and traitors. Many had their heads shaved in public as a form of humiliation for betraying the homeland. Allied forces mock Hitler by imitating the Nazi salute on his own balcony at the Reich Chancellery at the end of World War II. The automatic shaving machine promised to shave the faces of up to 12 men at once. Created in 1960, it was sold as a symbol of modernity and practicality. However, although it looked futuristic, for safety reasons, the invention never gained space in barbershops. The Curious Leg contest held in the 1930s. To ensure that the judges focused only on the legs, the participants were required to wear masks that hid their faces in an unusual and comical scene. Chang and Deng Bunker, portrayed around 1865, became world famous as the most well-known Siamese twins in history. Born in Thailand, they gave rise to the term Siamese and built a life in the United States, marrying and having children. Robert Hulston, known as the Pony, was born with a congenital deformity in his knees and elbows that made his joints bend outward. Because of this condition, he worked in circuses for 36 years between 1895 and 1970, being presented as an unusual attraction. This was the curious interior of an old airplane. Certainly, the look of a plane from the 1930s was nothing like what we know today, since the seats were simple and comfort was quite limited. In addition, there may have been fewer safety features, demonstrating how much commercial aviation was still in its early stages at the time. In this photo, the legendary Soviet snipers of 1945, members of the 3rd Shock Army of the 1st Belarusian Front. During World War II, thousands of women were trained as snipers and played decisive roles in combat against German forces. Recognized for their accuracy and courage, they became symbols of Soviet resistance. This was the Navy's beard contest in the year 1944. In a humorous way and to break the routine at sea, sailors competed by showing off their most comical styles in a moment of relaxation from military duties. Adolf Hitler in his youth, before becoming one of the darkest figures in history. In this rare photograph, he appears young, serving in the German army during the World War I. At the time, he was just another soldier among millions, with no one able to imagine the devastating impact he would have on the world years later. An unlikely encounter. In 1965, George Lincoln Rockwell, leader of the American Nazi Party, faces Martin Luther King Jr., the pastor who would become the greatest symbol of the fight for civil rights and racial equality in the United States. At the end of World War II, in 1945, Berlin was unrecognizable. The images of the city revealed a devastated scene, with entire blocks reduced to rubble after intense bombings. Empty streets and destroyed buildings showed the price of war and marked the end of the Third Reich. In 1930, a child poses next to a wild boar, as if it were a horse or a toy. A United States Marine offers a cigarette to a buried Japanese soldier while preparing to rescue him from the sand during the Battle of Iwo Jima in 1945. The photograph captures a rare moment of humanity amid one of the bloodiest confrontations of World War II. Barbar, the bearded dwarf, appears walking on all fours at a fair in 1938. At that time, circuses and variety fairs were very popular forms of entertainment, showing people with physical conditions as attractions. In 1930, double-decker bus designers carried out safety demonstrations to prove their stability. In the image, a vehicle is tilted in a controlled test to show that it would not easily tip over. At that time, double-deckers began to gain popularity in several cities due to their greater passenger capacity. A woman carrying her children in a large bucket balanced on her head in Japan around the year 1900. At that time, it was common for women to use practical and traditional methods to carry their children and some objects. A curiosity, the Nazi propaganda manual said that when Hitler approached, children's eyes instinctively turned away, as if they were before a superior figure. This seemingly trivial detail was exploited as a symbol of reverence and used to reinforce his image as a mythical leader, manipulating innocent gazes for political purposes. During World War II in 1943, Muslim soldiers of the 13th Waffen SS Handschar Division performed their prayers during a formation in Germany. This division was mostly composed of Bosnian Muslims in the service of the Nazi regime. After the victory in 1945, ships full of American soldiers triumphantly returned to the port of New York. The scene impresses with the crowd squeezed into every available space of the vessel, all eager to see their families again after years of war. For many, it was the end of a nightmare. For the city, a historic moment of reunion and celebration. This was Times Square on May 7, 1945, when the surrender of Germany marked the end of World War II in Europe. A crowd filled the streets to celebrate the long-awaited moment after years of fear and uncertainty. The explosion of collective joy symbolized the victory of freedom over Nazi tyranny. Brazilian soldiers landing on the Italian Warfront to fight alongside the Allies in World War II. In the city of Massa Rosa, the Brazilians were warmly received by the local population, who greeted them as heroes of the country's liberation. In the final days of World War II, German children were hastily enlisted to defend Berlin. The photo shows young soldiers of the Hitler Youth, used by the Nazi regime as a last desperate attempt at resistance against the advance of the Allied troops. The The powerful Schwerer Gustav, displayed in 1941 in Germany, was a 1,344-ton railway gun built by the Nazis to destroy fortifications. It was capable of firing 7-ton shells over 23 miles. In this photo, American soldiers pose in Germany in 1943, displaying their shells affectionately nicknamed Easter eggs for Hitler. With her striking beauty and magnetic gaze, Shirley Slade appears in 1943 wearing a helmet, flight goggles, and gloves. At 22 years old, she was a pilot of the WASP program, which trained women to transport military airplanes in the United States. After the French surrender and the signing of the armistice in 1940, Adolf Hitler made his only visit to Paris in his entire life. He walked through the city streets and posed in front of the Eiffel Tower in a demonstration of his deepest desire to show the world that German power could reach anywhere. A farmer has fun shooting jets of milk directly into the face of a cat, while another waits attentively for its turn on a farm in Texas in the year 1954. The young Walt Disney appears as a Red Cross ambulance driver during World War I. Before becoming an animation icon, he volunteered to serve in the conflict, performing various tasks on the European front. The experience marked his youth and preceded his creative career, which years later would revolutionize global entertainment with the creation of legendary characters. In 1943, in Russia, a German soldier was photographed sitting on Lenin's statue in a provocative tone, squeezing the nose of the Soviet leader in the middle of the war. The torn-off head of the Soviet leader's statue lies in the streets of Budapest during the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. The movement consisted of a series of protests against the Soviet regime begun in October that year, which quickly turned into a national revolt. Although the uprising was suppressed by the Red Army, it became a symbol of resistance to Soviet communist rule, raising the flag of victory over the Reichstag. Taken in 1945 by Yevgeny Khalday, the iconic photograph shows Soviet soldiers raising the flag of the Soviet Union in the heart of Berlin over the German parliament. The curious detail is that the photo was altered at the government's request. Watches were erased to hide looting practices. More smoke was added to intensify the drama, with the aim of turning it into a powerful propaganda icon. The enormous feet of the Statue of Liberty rest on the ground, newly arrived at Liberty Island. This curious scene happened in 1885, when the statue parts coming from France began to be assembled in New York. In the early 1980s, the feared drug lord Pablo Escobar, posing quietly in front of the White House, alongside his son as if he were just on a tourist visit. In 1966, John Lennon's controversial statement that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus generated outrage. In response, several religious groups organized protests and burned records and posters of the band. In 1972, during the Apollo 16 mission, astronaut Charles Duke left on the moon a photo of himself alongside his wife and 2 children. He placed it on the lunar surface, where it remains to this day, immortalized more than 236,000 miles from Earth. Work on Mount Rushmore began in 1927 in the Black Hills of South Dakota. The construction of the iconic monument began with the carving of the faces of 4 presidents of the United States: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. The work, which took 14 years to complete, became one of the most recognized symbols of American history. Ewan Clyde is photographed sunbathing under a cellophane blanket in 1932. At that time, health and wellness practices such as sunbathing began to become widely popular, as they were seen as modern ways of taking care of the body. An Italian family riding a Lambretta scooter in Sicily in 1963, with the 2 girls almost falling off the back of the vehicle. The Lambretta was an icon of urban mobility in the 1950s and 60s in Italy, offering accessible and practical transportation. A symbol of the Italian lifestyle, it became common to see entire families balancing on trips through the country streets. a young girl during the Great Depression in the 1930s. The period was marked by enormous economic and social difficulties in the United States and in several parts of the world, with millions of families facing extreme poverty and lack of resources. Suspended over the East River and still in skeleton form, the Manhattan Bridge emerged as a bold feat of engineering. In the image, workers walk on improvised planks, dozens of meters above the ground, without ropes or protection, relying only on their own balance. Not always in formal engagements, Queen Elizabeth II surprised with unexpected moments like this. In 1993, she appears testing an SA-80 rifle during a military demonstration. Protected from the rain by an umbrella and dressed with her characteristic elegance, the British monarch shows that tradition and power could also be united with a touch of boldness. This was the silent and moving role of Red Cross nurses during World War I. This image from 1917 shows one of them writing the last words of a wounded soldier, ensuring that his message reached his family. Between trenches and devastated fields, it was often these women who preserved the last voice of those who would not return home. A bride leaves her newly bombed house to get married in London on November 4, 1940. This was the experience of traveling on the luxurious Strat cruiser in the 1940s. The airplane, considered one of the most comfortable of its time, offered spacious cabins and full beds for rest during overnight intercontinental flights. Passengers could just sleep and quietly enjoy the trip at night. The New Hampshire Orphans' Home was a state-run orphanage on the former farm of Daniel Webster. Operating from 1871 to 1959, the institution provided shelter and care for many children for nearly 9 decades. In the image, a group of orphans is recorded being transported, part of the routine of this institution. John F. Kennedy Jr. inside the presidential airplane cabin in 1963. The photo shows the boy seated at the controls, looking like a little pilot in training. Son of then-President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, he became one of the most photographed children in the White House and a symbol of an era marked by the Kennedy family's charisma. In 1950, Soviet soldiers on a mission in the Arctic recorded an unusual encounter. They stopped their tanks to feed polar bear cubs that had approached in search of food. A German soldier is captured by Soviet troops as he leaves an underground shelter. The scene, recorded on June 13, 1942, showed the Red Army surprising the enemy. The Hitler Youth, created to mold German children and teenagers from 6 to 18 years old into paramilitary militias in the service of Nazism, became mandatory and lasted from 1922 to 1945. In this 1938 photo in Munich, Hitler appears surrounded by SA teenagers who looked at him with almost hypnotic devotion. A soldier returning home in Vienna, Austria, around 1945, shortly after the end of World War II. After years of conflict, thousands of soldiers came back scarred by permanent injuries. The Colosseum in Rome, Italy, photographed in 1944 during World War II. At that time, the city was under occupation by German forces until it was liberated in June 1944 by the Allied troops. A Union Field Hospital in Michigan during the 1860s in the American Civil War. These improvised structures were set up near battlefields to treat wounded soldiers, providing emergency medical care. The war, which occurred between 1861 and 1865, resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths and profoundly transformed the history of the United States. Installation of the access road during the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco around 1936. The work was an impressive feat of engineering, overcoming major technical and financial challenges. Inaugurated in 1937, the bridge became one of the most recognized landmarks in the world, a symbol of the city and a reference in suspension bridge construction. Students on a Ferris wheel in Kiev in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1986. The image captures a moment of leisure and fun amid the political and social context of the time. marked by the impact of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster that occurred that same year. Behind the scenes of the filming of Star Wars inside the Millennium Falcon in the mid-1970s, the iconic ship became one of the most recognizable settings of the franchise, with its detailed cockpit and interior that marked cinema history. A historic image shows Winston Churchill and Charlie Chaplin together in 1929. Both appear relaxed in a rare moment outside their remarkable roles in politics and entertainment. The series of photos became historic for bringing together two of the most influential personalities of the 20th century in the same scene. In this image, the London Scottish Regiment tosses a soldier into the air in an act of relaxation and motivation before the war. The photo, taken in 1915 in England during World War I, shows the soldiers in a moment of unity and team spirit inside the camp. These activities helped relieve tension and boost morale among soldiers amid the harsh preparation for combat. The amount raised by the Red Cross in 1918 gathered in a creative and public way, as shown in this scene in Birmingham, Alabama. Nurses, dressed in white with the emblematic cross on their chest, displayed a huge cloth where the population deposited coins and bills. Amid World War I and the devastation of the Spanish flu, each contribution represented hope and collective solidarity. The amount raised by the Red Cross in 1918 gathered in a creative and public way, as shown in this scene in Birmingham, Alabama. Nurses, dressed in white with the emblematic cross on their chest, displayed a huge cloth where the population deposited coins and bills. Amid World War I and the devastation of the Spanish flu, each contribution represented hope and collective solidarity. In 1941, British infantry soldiers still used long bayonets attached to their rifles, reminiscent of World War I style. This image shows fighters in the trenches, where closeness to the enemy was inevitable. Bayonets were more than weapons. They also functioned as tools to open boxes, cut wires, and even prepare food. In this photo, Al Capone, the crime boss in Chicago, appears relaxed fishing on his yacht in Florida in 1931. This was how pasta was made in the past. In 1865, in the city of Palermo, long strips were hung on clotheslines outdoors to dry under the sun. The street became an extension of the kitchen, where entire families accompanied the artisanal process. A wounded military dog faithfully poses beside his trainer in Japan in 1945. Even injured, he remained in service, while the soldier held a good luck flag captured from the Japanese. A military helicopter dumping special fluid over the Chernobyl area on April 29, 1986, 3 days after the explosion of reactor number 4 of the nuclear power plant. The substance was used in an attempt to contain the spread of radioactive particles released by the accident. American soldiers are about to land on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, during D-Day. The image shows the instant before the ramp opened, when each one knew that in the following moments they could face death under heavy enemy fire. The operation marked the largest amphibious invasion in history and was decisive for the liberation of France in World War II. The last photograph of Albert Lowenstein, the third richest man in the world at the time, while boarding his plane in 1928. During the flight, he entered the aircraft bathroom and mysteriously disappeared. During the Industrial Revolution, child labor became common in the United States, with thousands of children employed in textile factories and other industries. They were hired because they received lower wages and for their agility in machines. The incredible portable extendable bridge, created by L. Death in the Netherlands in 1926. Designed for emergencies and hard-to-reach places, it allowed for quick construction of temporary crossings. Overloaded wires in Pratt, Kansas, 1911. At that time, the electrical and telecommunications infrastructure was expanding rapidly in the United States, and scenes like this were common in growing cities. The iconic filming of Godzilla movies, carried out between 1954 and 1965, a period when the monster became a Japanese and global cinema icon. The productions used city models and giant suits to create the destruction scenes that marked generations. This was a classic day of the stressful routine on a crowded train in Japan in 1964, with exhausted passengers sleeping during long daily trips amid the country's economic growth in the 1960s. Shelves full of lost umbrellas in a lost and found office in Rome, 1964. Places like this were common in train stations and airports, where forgotten objects were stored until they were claimed by their owners. The gigantic mushroom of ashes rose to the skies as Mount Vesuvius erupted, impressing residents watching from a distance. This event occurred in 1944, devastating several nearby villages and even destroying some military airplanes stationed in the region. The heavy transporter carrying a bizarre, huge spherical tank intended for liquid hydrogen storage during the construction of the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, Soviet Union, in 1962. In September 1918, about 21,000 American soldiers formed the image of then-President Woodrow Wilson. The organization was carried out during World War I as part of activities aimed at showing support for the leadership of the United States. Final scene with Charlie Chaplin alongside an actress in one of his classic films. Chaplin, recognized for his comedic talent and for conveying emotions without the use of speech, became one of the greatest icons of silent cinema. The innovative vending machines with individual televisions caught attention at the Greyhound bus terminal in Los Angeles in the 1950s. Passengers could wait for their trips seated in armchairs equipped with screens at the cost of a few coins. A record of a child and his toy in 1945 amid the ruins of war. The boy maintains his innocence intact, reminding us that even in the darkest times, childhood insists on surviving. Sean Connery in 1962, during filming, signs a coconut for a Jamaican girl, a curious behind-the-scenes moment of the legendary first 007. Two workers clean the eagle-shaped ornament on the corner of the Chrysler Building in New York, one of the city's most iconic skyscrapers, which was near its completion at the time, in the year 1932. The Chrysler Building became a landmark of Art Deco architecture and one of the most recognized symbols of the New York skyline. Curiously, the assembly line of a Ford factory stopped on April 10, 1947, during the funeral of Henry Ford. Founder of the Ford Motor Company, he was the great creator of cars as we know them today, and of mass production, revolutionizing the automobile industry. Aerial view of the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles in the 1920s. The image shows the stage and bleachers stretching across the hillside, creating a unique setting for outdoor performances. Inaugurated in 1922, the amphitheater quickly became one of the main cultural spaces in the United States. The first photograph of Queen Victoria with her eldest daughter, Victoria, the Princess Royal, taken by Henry Collin in 1844. This rare record shows the British monarch still young alongside her firstborn.